Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Board of County Commissioners meeting for March 10th, 2020. We have one time certain at 10 a.m. We have an exec session for approximately 60 minutes most likely in the afternoon. We have Commissioner Sorensen and Commissioner Farr both on the telephone with us, even if you don't see them in the audience. And there'll be one item, 6A, in which I will hand the gavel over to Commissioner Burney for one item, and then I'll be back. So we'll start with item number 1, adjustments to the agenda. Does anybody have any adjustments to the agenda? Commissioner?
Just one quick note. I'm going to have to leave about 20 till 12 today.
Okay.
For a short bit. I have to have an airport errand to run.
Okay. All right.
We won't ask any questions.
We'll see if we can't get out before that.
Yeah.
Any other adjustments to the agenda? Okay, I don't see any. Any emergency business?
No.
Okay. Any public comment for us today? Got some? Okay. Thank you. We have two items. Mark Cardell, you're first, and then Josh Purvis, you're second. So feel free to come on up to the stand here and let us know your name and the district you live in, and we'll give you 3 minutes.
Hi, Mark Cardell. I'm in Commissioner Farr's district, a former employee, County Counsel's office here. You're all familiar, I think, with the litigation that I had with regards to the county. I hope that you will ask me questions later or even today. There's no way I can cover the 8 years of litigation in 3 minutes. I'm going to try to hit some highlights, though. This case, I was awarded over $700,000 total against the county, so I think it's worth some time. I also won the public records case where I was trying to find out the records as to why I was let go. Some of you weren't here with the county then, but I had to actually go to trial for that, and we were awarded attorney fees there as well. In addition, the county came after me at summary judgment for $92,000 in attorney fees that they had expended as of summary judgment. So I know the county spent at least $92,000 as of that date. When you figure appeal to the Ninth Circuit, when you figure a week-long jury trial, and before the jury trial, there was another summary judgment motion the county tried against me. I think that this case probably pretty easily cost the county about $1 million. So I would appreciate questions later or contacting me. Some of what happened was subject to a gag order because it was just easier to put a gag order on everything than to try to pull out pieces of evidence and say, yeah, you can talk about this publicly and not. So some of the stuff I still can't talk about. I can only talk about what I knew from either the public records case from my time working for the county or stuff that was talked about in trial. So there's limits still to what I can talk about unless 3 of you or your county administrator ask me questions. Then if the majority of you want to waive that confidentiality as to my discussions with you, either in executive session or with individual representing the county, I can do that. I see that I'm coming up on 1 minute. I've got the general judgment in there for the county on the public records case. If you'll look at page 13, number 8 condition there, the county tried to withhold the records because they wanted to keep everything confidential. I had a right to get those records regardless of whether, I mean, some stuff could be redacted, but not the entire thing. So that was one of the findings, one of the reasons I got attorney fees in that case. The next couple of pages, page 15, I referenced there a report from Economic Development that was done an investigation of me, Cardell's personal legal advice report. Who made that report? I believe that was Jordan, but he quoted some portions from Ms. Poling in that report. I think some of you know Jordan and Poling, and there are reports there that I talked about in terms of my investigation that I think are relevant to you folks. The actual reports didn't come out in the trial, so I can't quote them to you, but I can quote the part in the trial where I did mention those reports, and I would suggest that you look at those. On page 18, I quote from...
Thank you very much. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Can you It didn't,
It's you, Joe.
okay, next up is Josh Purvis. And then for those that are just signing up now, we'll get you in just a moment.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I just dropped off copies of 2 appeal letters, one from over a dozen clergy within Lane County, and the other from a variety of social service providers, all in response to concerns about COVID-19 as it relates to the homeless and the elderly in our community. And I'd like to read one of those letters. Dear elected leaders of the City of Eugene, Lane County, and the state of Oregon, as personnel with organizations and programs that provide direct services to people impacted by the ongoing housing and homelessness crisis, we urge Lane County to declare a state of emergency in response to the potential outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. Such a declaration will expand access to needed preventative and rehabilitative resources for our most vulnerable community members. Access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene is already an issue for the 15,000 plus people experiencing homelessness in Oregon. They will not be able to follow the simple preventative measures like hand washing suggested by the Center for Disease Control and Lane County Public Health to contain and prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus without expanded access. Access to adequate shelter is already an issue for the more than 1,800 individuals in Eugene who live unsheltered. How is it possible to stay home when sick if you are homeless? The penalties imposed on the unhoused for resting in public places make sheltering in place in response to the COVID-19 virus against the law. Our existing shelters are at capacity, and it's not reasonable to expect Egan Warming Centers, a service run almost exclusively by volunteers, many of whom are seniors, to fulfill the 350 people a night staffing requirement to operate during a pandemic. Access to adequate nutrition is already a challenge for the more than 55,000 food insecure individuals in Lane County who depend on food banks and meal sites. When people don't have enough food to eat, their immune system is compromised, leaving them more susceptible to the COVID-19 virus. Now, with increasing public anxiety about an eventual outbreak occurring locally, we're seeing volunteers opt out of staffing these services, which could lead to their reduction or cancellation. For these reasons, we urgently request that you declare a state of emergency and consider temporarily suspending or amending local laws so that social service providers may have greater flexibility and leverage to better attend to the unhoused and elderly during this public health crisis. Doing so will streamline government services for more efficient and effective utilization of community resources. Faith communities and social service providers stand at the ready. We await a show of leadership from our elected officials to act. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jesse Connor. Good morning.
Good morning.
State your name and your district, and we'll give you 3 minutes.
Yes, of course. So my name is Reverend Jessica Connor. I'm from Eugene, Oregon, and I am representing 18 clergy members from Lane County, Coburg, Cottage Grove, Florence, Junction City, and we are the collective that wrote the second letter that Joshua was just talking about. So we as clergy representing religious communities from all over Lane County, we implore that the Board of Commissioners declare a state of emergency and request state assistance. We believe that the response is necessary to proactively and concertedly address the potential outbreak of COVID-19 in our community, which we fear could particularly impact our most vulnerable neighbors in our churches and spaces of worship, including the elderly, but also the people we work with. We're seeing in Washington State, most of the people who have contracted COVID have subsequently died because they've been over the age of 70. Many, if not most, of my congregation members and parishioners from all over Lane County who attend religious services and volunteer with community ministries hosted at religious facilities are retired and elderly. The median age for most Christian churches in the United States is around 50. And mainline denominations, such as the United Methodist Church, which I represent, around a third of our membership is over 65 years of age. In addition to our religious services, many of our facilities are also used for community ministries, including outreach to the poor and unhoused. And each of the clergy listed the different ministries that they work with in their communities. A lot of churches host free meals, our food pantries, clothing closets, offering free counseling services. And we also host a lot of Egan warming centers. My church hosts the youth site in particular to provide emergency shelter to hundreds during the extreme weather. I just did a shift this morning from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And even without a reported outbreak of the COVID-19 in Lane County, we're already seeing a decline in our active volunteers in order to respond to schools and workplaces, and they canceling their activities and operations. And despite whatever precautionary measures the Center for Disease Control or the Lane County Public Health recommends as a deterrent to the spread of COVID-19 virus, our members and the public in general are already seeming to react like the disease as if it was a public health emergency already. As such, we're facing the possibility of having to decrease the availability or even cancel our community ministries, such as the Sunday Interfaith Breakfast, which feeds hundreds of homeless people every Sunday, or even hosting our warming centers because of the declining turnout of volunteers. These concerns extend to our membership generally, who are concerned about the transmission of COVID, even just within our facilities. And without the coordinated partnership of faith communities, social services, and government agencies, with the leadership of our elected officials, we fear our unhoused brothers and sisters are already plagued by the ills of poverty and may suffer even more from the retraction of services that we as the faith community provide. And as that possibility pains us, we do not feel it's appropriate to ask. And you can read the rest of my letter. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Reverend. Wayne Martin.
Good morning, Commissioners. Manager. Thank you very much for giving some vigilance to the problem of homelessness, as I have noted that you've been doing. I think because of you and those who are not here, we are really on our way. I feel something more substantial breaking open, and well, it should, because the need is so great. I want to put in a word for what other cities are doing currently, and that is to find ways to shelter unhoused people who are living out in the wilds, organizing small shelters of up to 10 people, and writing up a set of guidelines for how they can live together, and making available a stipend for 2 out of those 8 or 10 groups, numbered groups, to be supervised with guidelines and rules such as we have at Nightingale and such as we have at CSS. I've been working with a group which has come to name itself House Everyone. We typically, when we meet, have at least 15 unhoused people, sometimes as many as 20, meeting with housed folks. And they break up into groups, and these are working groups. And I think it's time now to recognize that there are large numbers of unhoused people who are very motivated, very skilled, very creative, and want to be part of the solution. I would encourage us to think of a way to have a meeting where maybe for 15 or 20 of them could sit at the table with some of you or all of you to discuss how they can play a bigger part and take more responsibility, as I'm sure you would like them to do. There are irresponsible unhoused people out there, but there are irresponsible housed people out there. So the problem is, can we get them together and ask them to buy into the work you're already trying to do so that it better informs you and it better informs them? We should do this soon. Let's utilize Sarai Johnson in this process. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else here that didn't sign up that would like a chance to speak? Okay, I don't see any, so we'll move on to commissioners' responses. I'm going to start with those that are on, commissioners that are on the phone, to ensure I don't, I remember that they're there. So, Commissioner Sorensen or Commissioner Farr, do you have any remonstrance? Okay, I hear none.
Yes, I do.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
This is Pete Sorensen. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who came for public comment this morning, and I was able to hear everything clearly. So, number one, thanks for taking the time to come for public comment. Number two, with regard to the comments of Mr. Cardell, I wasn't quite clear what you were trying to say in your public comment, other than I know you've had some litigation involving the county, and I would appreciate if you would take the time to write a letter to the Board of Commissioners and send it to all the commissioners to further elaborate on your public comment this morning, and also more specifically what you wanted to get across and didn't have time to do so. Secondly, with regard to the speakers on the topic of the homeless and the impact of the coronavirus, one thing I was looking for over the weekend on the internet was what are local communities doing in light of the fact that many of the volunteers who are helping the homeless are elderly and thus in the category most maybe most negatively affected by the disease, and also the fact that homeless people who don't have bathrooms have a hard time washing their hands as is being recommended. Well, one community that I found was actually doing something I think we might be able to do, and that is they were using these temporary hand washing stations to, and this was San Diego, I believe it was San Diego County government was getting these hand washing stations and putting them in areas where people were congregating, and not just the homeless, but also in areas where there were lots of people. And these are foot-operated pump hand washing stations. We actually either owned or rented some for the Lane County Fair a few years ago, and I think they're still used at the Lane County Fair. And that would at least be a way to respond to the need for hand washing stations and minimize the transmission of this horrible disease. So that's something I wanted to report back, and I'm all in favor of getting a briefing and having staff brief the board and thus the public on what the governor's recent executive order declaring an emergency might mean for Lane County, and what a Lane County emergency declaration might involve. So I really appreciate people coming in and bringing these things to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and we will be having an update as we will be moving into the Board of Health this afternoon, and under that is an update from Dr. Ludke and our public health officer, and Karen Gaffney, Director of HNHS. So we'll be getting into that in more detail, and I know, Mr. Mokryski, you have an update on some information regarding that as well. Do you want to do that now, or should we finish our remonstrance?
You can, I hear Commissioner Farr
Yes.
has some comments, but I am prepared to provide a brief overview, maybe somewhat redundant to what you hear from Dr. Ludke, although he will be a much more informed expert on the matter. But I think just for the sake of the public comment that we heard this morning, I'm happy to provide some some comments related to the state and local emergency declaration and a couple other matters.
Great. Why don't we do remonstrance first, and then
Okay.
we'll have you do that brief. So Commissioner Farr, I heard you.
Thank you, Chair Buck. You know, Mr. Mokrzycki just covered basically what I was going to ask him to do. And Mr. Mokrzycki, on Friday at 1:30 p.m., there was a meeting which was, I believe, attended by many of the COAD members, and I believe that Dr. Ludke was there. I intended to be there myself, but I was unable to make it. And I'm hoping and expecting that that will be a part of what is covered this afternoon, is how our local service agencies are coordinating with Lane County Health Department in providing the services that are so stressed right now.
Thank you.
The second, and so I'll wait patiently for this afternoon on a response to that. The second is to Reverend Martin. Thank you for being there. The House Everyone meeting I've attended, and it really is a group of people who can really provide valuable insights as to not just causes, but potential assistance for people who are suffering from homelessness. And as you mentioned, there are irresponsible unhoused people out there. There are irresponsible housed people out there also. The voices that I've heard from House Everyone are people who really do have some innovative ideas. Some of the people who are there are names that we recognize, and I'll look forward to hearing more from you and working more with you, Reverend Martin, for the future. Chair Buck, that's all I have right now. Once again, I'll wait patiently for this afternoon's discussion by Dr. Ludke and Mr. Mokrzycki.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from us here? Any remonstrance? Commissioner Bozovich?
I'll just note for Commissioner Sorensen, because he might not be where he could get the Register Guard's front page, but there was a front page picture of the mission to setting up one of those hand wash stations. I think folks are pretty aware that they're available and available by rent from a lot of different companies. I will note that we've already declared an emergency, this board has, relative to homelessness. So I'm kind of surprised that that declaration doesn't somehow or another help us with this situation, because we're already under an emergency declaration.
Commissioner Burney?
First, Mr. Cardell, I've heard your name for about 8 years. It's nice to put a face with the name. I think that I would agree with Commissioner Sorensen in terms of a letter. If you have a specific ask or want to bring something specifically to our attention, 3 minutes doesn't tend to do it. If I may, I asked the chair if I could do this, so I can. But I think as it relates to the heartfelt asks for pragmatic action, I believe, if you don't mind, Mr. Mokrzycki, now might be a good time to walk through your understanding and our understanding of county response, governor's declaration, relationships, et cetera.
Happy to do that, Chair, Commissioners. So I will provide just a brief update for you on a number of matters, and again, remind folks that at 1:30 today, we'll have our public health officials, Dr. Ludke, our public health officer, here to get into more detail about the public health role and responsibility that Lane County has. But so some of this may be redundant, and some of it may just scratch the surface, but hopefully we'll provide some basic overview. So currently, we have no presumptive or confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Lane County. There are 13 presumptive cases and 1 confirmed case in other areas of Oregon. Lane County Public Health has been actively preparing, monitoring, and communicating with our medical provider community and the general community for several weeks now. We have daily communications with our partners at the Oregon Health Authority and the CDC so that we can track, monitor, and investigate potential cases should they arise. We recognize that this is a growing community concern. It has disrupted supply chains for household cleaning products, as we've seen many sort of basic things like hand sanitizer here, and some other things we've had a shortage of it at local outlets. It's also provided some economic or may potentially have some economic impacts. So we've heard folks that have sort of shared perspectives on both ends of this. We aren't responding enough, or we should be responding more, or we shouldn't be doing anything at all. And I think the reality is Lane County is the public health agency for our community, and what we're desiring to do is be thoughtfully and actively involved to provide good factual information, to be prepared to respond to our community when needed. I want to share with the board and the public that Lane County has opened today a public call center at 9 a.m. today was opened. It will operate from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays, and that number is 541-682-1380. So again, it's a joint information center, public call center that is open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the phone number is 541-682-1380. We also have an email address for anyone that is seeking, so for folks who came today and are seeking resources or assistance or coordination, please email Corona-info, so that's CORONA-info at lanecountyor.gov. Corona-info at lanecountyor.gov. That is a great place for folks to send requests, clarification of information, or seek additional resources. To date, Lane County has not declared an emergency. The trigger for us, I want to just clarify Commissioner Bozovich's comment, a homeless emergency was declared by the board. That was largely a symbolic measure. The board acknowledged at the time that it did that it did not have it did not allow us to access additional resources or waive local restrictions that are in place as is able in some other cities, counties, or states across the country. A declaration of emergency related to our emergency management function does have a practical impact. But I want to clarify the difference between a state declaration of emergency and a local declaration. The governor has declared a state of emergency related to the coronavirus statewide, because there are now 13 presumptive and 1 confirmed cases statewide. The trigger for Lane County to declare an emergency would be a confirmed case in Lane County, and to date we do not have a confirmed case in Lane County. The state declaration allows Lane County to access state and federal resources for public health resources, for testing, for the call center that we just opened up, for things like nursing services and other things. A local declaration would largely allow us additional flexibility at the local level to waive local restrictions. So for example, the county administrator, the county administrator's current ability to allocate resources on an individual basis is up to $150,000. A local declaration would waive that restriction, and so it would give additional flexibility for us to expend resources without having to come to the board. It doesn't necessarily make additional local resources available. It may make additional state or federal resources available for response to particular cases that have been confirmed. So some clarification there around the local declaration. It also allows us to do things like seek reimbursement for overtime, for staffing, and other things like that. Lane County has put in place an incident command system structure. So that is an emergency operations center with an incident commander. The incident commander is an official in our public health office, and we have various roles that have been staffed up in that incident command structure. That is for those who are familiar with emergency management response and preparedness, that is a tested structure that we put in place to respond to emergencies locally and nationally. We have, as part of that structure, a logistics chief, and that individual has already responded and continues to respond to local nonprofit service providers, including the Mission, who have made requests for various things. It could be hand washing stations or other resources that are available. Understand that there are some constraints to our availability to actually access because of the supply chain issues, access some things like hand sanitizer and some other things. But we do have a structure in place currently that allows us to partner with our local service providers and respond to those needs. So again, I would encourage folks to either call the call center or email corona-info@lanecountyor.gov. We are prepared to declare a local emergency. So I want to say that we are, if and when, my time up?
Oh, that must have been somebody.
If and when we do have a confirmed case in Lane County, we are prepared and to declare an emergency and to do everything. So I want to reassure the board and the public that we have been actively involved and engaged, and we have a robust, proven structure in place to be able to respond when cases are identified in our local community. Couple other things I just want to put up here on the screen, and this, our Lane County Public Health officials have developed this very simple graphic, and these are, I think, rather intuitive, but I just want to reiterate to the board and to the public, and we'll be putting this information out, the do's and don'ts, very simple but proven things that we all can and should be doing to keep ourselves safe and healthy. Don't touch your eyes, your nose, or your mouth. Do wash your hands, cover coughs, and stay home if you're sick. So very simple things that we want to remind things. Dr. Ludke will expand on those basic things for folks this afternoon. I want to also remind folks to be careful where you receive information regarding COVID-19. There's a lot of misinformation online. There's a lot of email correspondence that is coming that is pushing misinformation. So make sure the information that you're receiving is from official, largely government agencies. Encourage folks to visit lanecountyor.gov/coronavirus for information. So you can go to Lane County, actually our lanecountyor.gov website, and there's a banner at the top. You can click on that, and there's updated information for you there. So I'll stop there, Madam Chair, but I just want to reiterate that the state declaration that the governor declared does allow Lane County to access state and federal resources, and we currently are tracking those resources. We have a robust structure in place to respond to local community needs. We are prepared to declare a local emergency once a local case is confirmed. And please access the phone numbers and emails and websites that I noted for updated information and additional resources.
I appreciate you responding to the chair, but it was I that asked you for a bit of that. I'm just messing with you. So what I was hoping for from that, for those of you that spoke to this issue, was what you're asking for, which is Lane County to declare an emergency. We're ready to do it. We're poised to do it. Certain things trigger that. Those haven't occurred yet. And it does mean certain flexibilities and perhaps additional resources externally, but we have to wait and see. But we're there with you. Our administrator took all my time. I'm through with my remarks. Thank you very much, by the way.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Mokryski, for explaining all that. I will be asking some questions of public health staff this afternoon, particularly around senior facilities and how we're going to be protecting them, as well as our ability to work with the unhoused and help them at least keep track of those dues. So I would just ask, could you repeat the email address again for people to request resources? I think it was corona was it info?
Right, Corona, CORONA dash info, INFO, at lanecountyor.gov. Corona-info at lanecountyor.gov.
Thank you. It just wasn't in the press release about the call center, and I want to be able to share that when people ask me.
We were just up at the Oregon Association of Counties, yesterday, our one day a month, we go up there and talk about all things counties throughout the state. And this, of course, is one of the big subjects that we talked about. And when some of our colleagues in other counties have declared a state of emergency already, providing them some flexibility of resources from the state, the $8 billion package that was signed by the national government to help fight COVID-19 was signed, and they're getting money out. In Oregon, it was expected that our allocation would be relatively around $7 million, which doesn't really go very far. We'll see if that's the actual amount that we get, but that money, it sounded like, as presented to us from the Oregon Health Authority, a bulk of that is for funding staff to kind of track down people who are in contact with somebody who might be presumed or positive in the testing. And that's a lot of work, because you have to call around and see where they were and contact all the people they've been around. So it'll be interesting to see the percentage of allocation, because there's just a lot of staff time that's involved, but then the masks and the other, sanitizer or other materials that they need to, in testing kits that they need to combat this virus, seem to be a much smaller percentage. And I'm hoping that we can get some more clarification perhaps on that this afternoon, because from the letters that you presented to us, it seemed like there may be a presumption that a lot of that kind of those material products would become available if we declared a state of emergency, and I'm not sure that that's really the case. But being able to ensure that we are caring for those that are most vulnerable in our community, especially during this kind of a pandemic, is absolutely on the top of our minds. And so thank you for thinking of that. Thank you for coming forward. I appreciate what you're doing in the community. We know we need your volunteers out there. But, I'm afraid even if they had the protective gear, they may still stay at home just out of plain fear. It doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't be vigilant. So thank you very much for everybody that came. We'll move on now to our consent calendar. Is there, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Berney, second by Commissioner Bozovich. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. And we'll move on to item 6A, Order 20-03-10-06. And at this point, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest. I am related to the Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul, who's a party of this particular transaction. So I'm going to hand the gavel over to our Vice Chair, Berney. I'm going to step out of the room, and if somebody would be so kind to let me in as soon as this item is complete, we'll carry on. Thank you.
This could be dangerous, Jeff. Jeff, would you like to inform us of what this item is about?
Yeah. Good morning, Commissioners. The item before you is the Housing Authority and Community Services Agency, Hacksaw now known as Homes for Good, is requesting removal of a deed restriction of property that the county transferred to them back in 1990. 1990, the county transferred a tax foreclosed property to the Housing Authority for affordable housing purposes. And they've used the property, actually St. Vincent de Paul built a duplex on the property. St. Vincent de Paul owns the duplex. The Housing Authority owns the property. At the time, the only mechanism under statute to allow the transfer was to transfer it to another public agency for a public purpose. And that's in the deed. And at this point, the Housing Authority wishes to sell the property, and in order to do that, to sell it to a private party, they would need that deed restriction removed. And I guess they're going to sell the property to consolidate their management of properties and use the proceeds from the sale to further affordable housing. So that's the matter before the board, whether to approve removing the deed restriction.
And if I can, Vice Chair Berney, what happened is, since the deed was originally conveyed, there have been a number of amendments to that particular statute over time. And what happened is there became a question as to whether or not the board could actually remove the restriction given when the deed had been conveyed. So in conjunction with Alan Thayer, who was the attorney for St. Vincent de Paul, he went to a title insurance person and found the language that appears in the quitclaim deed that will eliminate all of those issues. So rather than get into a transaction that may have been questioned as to whether or not the board actually had the authority to remove it now, given the different changes, or the board just conveying whatever interest it has in the form of a quitclaim deed with language that the title company would accept, this seemed like it was the best way to accomplish what everybody wanted, which was to get us off of it, transfer the property, and allow them to do with it whatever they were going to do.
We're in a unique situation here. We have two board members that I don't know if they're self-quarantining or what, but Commissioners Sorensen or Farr, do either of you have anything, questions at this point?
Negative.
This is Pete Sorensen, and I'd be happy to make a motion to approve.
It's been moved to approve the order in the matter of authorizing the removal of a deed condition requiring property conveyed to the Housing Authority and Community Services Agency be used for a public purpose. The map number is identified.
This is Pat Farr. I'm sorry, this is Pat Farr. I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion. Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. So I'm going to be voting against the motion based on the fact that we have declared a housing emergency. We were willing to take part of our fairgrounds and event center and dedicate it to housing. Letting go this property from public purpose, I think, violates that declaration and also doesn't match the fact that we're willing to go ahead of master planning on one particular enterprise for the county. And here we're basically following another master plan to get rid of housing and affordable housing and consolidate. To me, we should be looking at hanging on to this and seeing how we can make the consolidation work regardless. So I will be voting no.
Mr. Turk, Mr. Dingle, even Mr. McDonald, is there a response? Will this in fact, my question, will this in fact decrease the amount of public or supported housing?
Increase.
Vice Chair Berney, it will actually increase the amount of affordable housing. The problem with the scattered sites, the Housing Authority and St. Vincent de Paul have discovered over time is that scattered sites are difficult to manage economically. So when you have a duplex in one part of town and you've got a 20-unit project somewhere else, the staff person that has to go out and serve that duplex's time is better used into the more dense properties. So for us, the opportunity to get these scattered sites that both the Housing Authority or Homes for Good have scattered around the community, and at that time in the 1990s, that seemed like the only way to get new affordable housing, really has been trumped by the consolidation into larger projects, such as the projects Homes for Good are doing right now, downtown or also on Martin Luther King, or their new project in Springfield. So for us, having the opportunity to have our staff freed up to deal with other properties is actually a consolidation that works very well for us.
Vice Chair Berney, this is Commissioner Farr.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I recognize Mr. McDonald's voice, and I'm going to be voting in favor of the motion that I seconded for the reasons that Mr. McDonald just outlined, that this really does allow for a greater use of the funds will be used to further provide more affordable housing. Scattered site housing, we've heard for years now, is very difficult to manage, very difficult to maintain, and that more consolidated housing is easier to manage, thereby less expensive to continue to provide the housing. That's my vote in favor. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing, or in this case, hearing none, I'm going to call the vote. So all those in favor of the motion to authorize the removal of a deed condition requiring property conveyed to the Housing Authority and Community Services Agency be used for a public purpose, map number 17-04-28-14-006-000 at 4403 Markham Lane, Eugene. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay?
The motion is passed. Commissioner Bozovich voting nay and Commissioner Buck excused. Thank you. I'm really nervous at this. Would someone please bring the chair in so that she can resume this meeting?
You seemed in perfect command, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. For the record, I'm back, and thank you, Vice Chair, for going over that item. The next item is not till 10 o'clock, so we have a few minutes. I will go back to you, Mr. Mokryski, for any other county announcements.
One other thing I wanted to, I'll just put this out there related to the coronavirus response and discussions that I didn't mention previously. We met yesterday with our leadership team and key staff to talk about, I gave an update on sort of the public health and community response, but we also met yesterday to talk about our decisions and response as an employer. So what are we doing as an organization? So a couple things I want to say. We are evaluating the stepping up the number of times that we are, the frequency of cleaning and additional supplies for our facilities throughout the organization. So we're looking at that. We're also evaluating potential things that may need to be done related to any of our workplace or personnel policies to ensure that people are able to take the, if they're not feeling well, we want people to not come into work, and so they're able to have the time that they need to do that. So we're looking at various policies, talking about things like social distancing, large gatherings, and meetings and things, and we'll be making decisions around that on a case-by-case basis. The discussion about telecommuting certainly has come up. It's important to remember that for some organizations where their employees do typically desk work, working from home is maybe an appropriate thing to do. For a public agency where so many of our employees are on the front lines of providing services, we have medical assistants and nurses and nurse practitioners and physicians. We have deputies in the field. We have road workers and park workers. And so the work that the vast majority of our employees do is out in the community, and they're not able to do their work. The vast majority of our employees are not able to do their work from home. Some may be able to. So we'll be dealing with that on a case-by-case basis and evaluating thoughtfully what are the things that as an employer we need to be addressing. We sent a communication to all of our employees yesterday to lay out a few of these things, and we put a work group together of key officials to start looking at some of these decisions, and our goal is by the end of this week to wrap up and make some decisions on those areas and then communicate further with our employees by the end of this week and early next week. So I just wanted to offer that as from an employer perspective as well as a public health community community resource. There's a lot of work happening to make sure that we are prepared to respond to all of these matters. We will, Mr. Kyler is here. Alex, do you in 9 minutes, do we want to start would you like to do that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Start the response
Legislative
to,
wrap-up. Yes.
on the legislative. So I want to just provide and as Mr. Kyler gets settled, I'll just say briefly, we had a short session here. Mr. Kyler did incredible work in just like a month of time working with the leadership and our delegation in the legislature on some really critical fixes, budgetary fixes in areas like behavioral health and community corrections, trying to advance critical priorities the board has established, our Shelter Navigation Center in partnership with the City of Eugene. Some great progress was made, and then it all sort of fell apart at the last minute, which we'll talk about. I want to just kind of put it out as the big picture. We remain cautiously hopeful that the governor and the legislature will find a path to come back and identify solutions to these critical budgetary fixes and community priorities. At the moment, however, we remain in limbo on some significant priorities. The Shelter Navigation Center project is really for us in limbo until we're able to identify the resources to be able to advance that work, as well as some of these critical areas Mr. Kyler will talk about. So I want to just say that there was some great work that happened. We're hopeful we can take that momentum if there's another path that is created, but at the moment we don't have that path.
Thank you, Chair Buck, Commissioners. Alex Kyler here. Yeah, we did come out of the 2019 session with a couple of really critical shortfalls in the state biennial budget. One was the Community Corrections Act, which we felt had not been funded adequately by the legislature during the long session. And the other was community mental health programs took a cut in the long session. And there were a couple reasons for both those things, but that was really framed up my work during the interim was to be involved with a couple of different work groups, particularly around the behavioral health and mental health funding. So we got into the session with those two priorities, into the short session with those two priorities in mind, but also had to respond to a bill that we really hadn't been alerted to, where the Speaker of the House of Representatives announced that she wanted to make a $40 million investment in homelessness around the state of Oregon. And in fact, in her initial work, had named two cities, the city of Eugene and the city of Salem, as receiving special direct appropriations for navigation centers in those communities. So there were really quite a bit of work to be done in those first couple of weeks of the short session to try to get the language right in the housing emergency bill, and to try to move the needle on stuff we'd failed, frankly, on in 2019, namely the additional money for community corrections and the additional money for behavioral health. Ultimately, we had that stuff all pretty much, a lot of people working on it. We had it pretty much queued up. And then over Senate Bill 1530, the cap and trade bill, the Republicans in both chambers left the Capitol with about 14 days left in the session. And so while budget bills continued to advance and the leadership sort of pleading with the Republicans to come back for the budget issues, when in fact the Republicans said, hey, we'll come back for the budget bills, the session sort of imploded it there on Friday before I think it was Friday, March 6, was when the leadership gavelled out. So left a lot of business undone, and just including, so we had $5 million coming to Lane County in House Bill 4001, which was related to housing. We had $25 million statewide for community corrections in the end of session budget bill, which was House Bill 5204. We had $9 million for county behavioral health programs in that budget bill. There was another really good package for aid and assist, which is sort of related to the behavioral health and mental health programs that we've been the problems we've been dealing with, and fair amount of both state and federal money for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which was another budget issue that we'd been tracking on. So as Administrator Mokrohysky mentioned, it was over $10 million of money that ultimately would have come to Lane County. And so that was left on the table. We are hearing that there may be a special session called by the governor in order to deal with these budget issues. At question, or sort of unknown at this point, is when she calls a special session, she can sort of build four walls around that to say what's going to be on the table and what's not. And whether the climate bill is included in that or not is yet unknown, and I think that will have big implications for whether that special session is going to be successful or not. I'm hearing perhaps early April for that session, but we'll know more. A couple of you were in Salem yesterday and know that the emergency board met. They did allocate some emergency money for the COVID-19 response. And I will be providing Health and Human Services with an outline of that, those dollars and how they're likely to be spent. The military department also got an appropriation to stand up 6 regional response centers, sort of what they term a proof of concept, to see what that department is able to do as this illness continues to evolve in the state of Oregon. There was additional funding that was somewhat controversial. You may have read about it in the paper or heard about it a little bit yesterday, for the governor to have $5 million to the Department of Environmental Quality for climate change executive order work. We have not seen the executive order, so it's not quite clear what that will entail. But that issue continues to evolve. So the emergency board doesn't have that much money to spend. They were appropriated $75 million in the long session, so they can't spend it, and it probably wouldn't have been wise for them to spend it all at once. It's really meant for sort of emergency issues, so that tool is not a great tool for the remainder of the biennium, particularly with the amount of money they have left there. So I think we will see a special session. As I said, the 4 walls of that special session are yet to be determined.
Very good. Thank you very much. Leaves us with just a minute or two, so let's switch out to the next item, which is item 6B, and give a moment for our guests to come to the table. Welcome. Looks like you have a presentation for us today.
A very short one.
Okay. Let you get set up. Ready? Okay. So I'll start reading this in. It's kind of long, so here we go. Item 6B, second reading and public hearing, ordinance number PA 1359, in the matter of amending the Metro Plan, excuse me, to adopt amendments to the Springfield Transportation System Plan for application to the urbanizable lands within the Springfield urban growth boundary and adopting a savings and severability clauses, and second reading and public hearing ordinance number 19-05 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 10 to adopt amendments to the Springfield Development Regulations for application to urbanizable lands within the Springfield urban growth boundary, LC 10-600-5, or excuse me, 10.600-15, and adopting savings and severability clauses. The applicant is the City of Springfield, and with us is Sasha Vartarian, Transportation and Planning Supervisor, and Emma Newman, Springfield, City of Springfield Senior Transportation Planner. Thank you very much for coming. And so we'll start out. I started out with all the titles. Tell me when I need to start the full language, if you need to have a statement before I begin.
You read the ordinance, so then you would explain that the rules of the hearing.
You want me to head
and then
right into
hand
the
it
hearing?
over to
Okay,
staff.
let's do that. So this is a public hearing. The date today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2020. The proposed Lane Code amendments are subject to the applicable criteria identified in Lane Code 10-600 or 10.600-15. The order of proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff, followed by any public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. Participants are encouraged to raise issues or concerns with sufficient specificity to enable the county to address or respond to them. Prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request that the record be left open to provide an opportunity to present additional written evidence or arguments regarding the application. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance to ORS Chapter 197. Now I'll call for disclosure of board commissioner abstentions due to any conflicts of interest or bias. Any abstentions? Anybody on the phone?
I have none.
Okay, no abstentions. Are there any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear the matter? Hearing and seeing none, we'll go straight to the report from the staff.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. With me is Emma Newman, City of Springfield Senior Transportation Planner. So thank you. We're asking the board to have the second reading, which you've had, and hold a public hearing for the two revised.
Can you pull your mic a little bit closer?
And hold a public hearing for the revised ordinances. But first, apologies for last meeting's inaccurate instructions and some process cleanup and explanation. After the November 4th, 2019 joint public hearing, we should have set a date certain for the third reading and potential adoption of the ordinances by the board. This was not done because staff was waiting on the City of Springfield Council to go through their adoption process. However, in not setting the third reading, the ordinances essentially died. In restarting the readings of the revised ordinances, for clarity's sake, I should have renumbered the ordinances. So, in order to formally capture the comments from the initial public hearing, I ask that the board incorporate into the record for this proceeding the minutes from the earlier public hearing held on November 4th, 2019, and all documents received by staff as part of the process. Doing so will ensure that the record is complete, and again, my apologies for the confusion. And once the public hearing is closed, the next step is to discuss and action by the board. So we'd be happy to take any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move into public testimony. So at this time, I'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on this item? Please come forward. Feel free to come to the podium and state your name, and then we'll give you 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Michael Gannon. I basically live in Eugene. I'm in great doubt about the...
Excuse us for a moment.
That's on me, sir. I apologize.
I have great doubts about the legitimacy of going forward with these changes because of the inadequate examination of the effects of the changes proposed in regards to climate change. I think what we're seeing everywhere throughout our nation and the globe is people's difficulty in assessing how dramatic and how quickly the changes in climate will affect everything that we do in our lives. So this is a typical situation in which we're looking at making some serious innovations to make what we have already operating work better, as if there were no climate changes coming. So in all of our public decisions, we're really faced with how to articulate the problems and measure the changes that are going to be created by what we're doing. Ironically, the effort about the coronavirus is a very good parallel analogy. The coronavirus is actually taking over the globe much faster than global warming did, although we don't even know, for example, to what effect of its repercussions are because of global warming. But just looking simply at some of the factual information coming from research scientists, one of the astonishing facts that I learned was that there were 400 billion tons of ice melted in January in the Arctic. That's 400 million tons that would not have melted a generation ago. So all these on the automobile transportation system is the most critical contributor to global warming in the United States, and then follows the fossil fuel generation of electricity. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here that would like to speak to this issue? I see none, so I'll close a public comment, and we'll move to staff for any final comments before the board discusses.
Let Emma respond to the public comment.
Very good.
Yeah, so I'd like to highlight a few elements of both ordinances with regards to the comments just received. There are some additional bicycle and pedestrian projects being added to the transportation system plan, and those are lower carbon forms of transportation. They also have public health benefits. Within the development code amendments, there are amendments to the bike parking to make it a more encouraged use of transportation for people to bike throughout Springfield. The street standards are also providing more flexibility within the different cross sections for a typical street design. So by reducing the amount of surface area, it's reducing the stormwater costs to treat the stormwater that's running off a smaller surface, as well as less carbon intensive construction of a street when you build narrower streets. We've also changed the sidewalk standards to require planter strips, which is another area that can help sequester carbon with planting street trees, as well as treat stormwater and dissipate when it has heavy rains. That can dissipate over a longer time period. And then there are a number of different changes to the development code to allow for reduction of motor vehicle parking spaces required during development. And those are through use of transit, increased bike parking, a variety of different ways to encourage active and low carbon forms of transportation.
Very good. All right, we'll open the discussion to the board. Are there any questions?
I would like to be recognized when
Yes.
we get a chance.
Commissioner Sorensen, please proceed.
Okay. Hey, thank you. I'm looking at the bottom of page 3 of the memo. It's entitled Board Goals. And it says, as you pointed out, co-adoption supports Lane County's strategic plan and directly implements the strategy to support existing partnerships and foster new partnerships and collaborations to improve health and safety in our communities. And then it talks about priority 1, safe and healthy county, talks about priority 2, vibrant communities, and goes on to page 4, priority 3, infrastructure. And my question is, do we have a specific climate language concerning climate change that would be or should have been addressed in the section on board goals in the memo? Is there something specific to climate change as opposed to safe and healthy, vibrant, and infrastructure?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sorensen, the climate change initiative that the board has identified falls under vibrant communities. So when we think about vibrant communities, think about the 3 E's: environment, equity, and economy. So that's under there. So that would fall under vibrant communities. We don't typically call out, individual initiatives under each priority. We ask folks to identify how initiatives are consistent with the 4 strategic overarching priorities that the board has identified.
So, and Mr. Mokrice, thank you for that response. When does the board next consider the list of priorities so that as conditions change and maybe the climate crisis becomes more severe or communicable diseases become something more important, that we can adopt a change in the board priorities? When does that occur next in the normal sort of sequence of when the board considers the board goals and board priorities?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sorensen, we should have an update on the strategic plan. We do quarterly updates with the board. You just adopted this strategic plan, I think, in December. So quarterly updates should be happening within the next month. And we certainly can flag that issue. And there are a number of considerations, I think, for the board to think about, related to areas in which you ask staff to identify the impacts. So you have health impacts, you have financial impacts already noted, and then consistency with the strategic plan. And so we certainly can have that conversation as part of our next update. And if the board desires, we could, have a more in-depth work session to discuss particularly, the climate change aspects of that.
Yeah, thank you very much for your summary of that, and I really appreciate it. I do support the proposal. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Farr, if you're still on the phone, I want to make sure you have an opportunity.
I'm fine, thank you, Chair Buck.
Any other comments or discussion? Commissioner Bernie.
I support this motion. I know that you didn't even intend to be here again. It just so happened. I agree with the generalities of the public input. I don't believe Lane County yet has a climate action plan. I think that's what we're working on. And my understanding is the first piece of that will be internal ops, and the second piece of that will be external, entire county, which I'm looking forward to. I think I have a different take on that than many climate activists, but nonetheless, I consider myself one. I also consider myself someone that's going to support the net job creation through that process, and looking at how one integrates that into creating a healthier economy. Having said that, I am a member of the Springfield community. I applaud the community's work increasing ease and facilitating more bike traffic, more walking traffic, planting of trees, all of those things, which will be incorporated once we have a damn plan with measures, which we don't have yet. So while we are moving in that direction and not moving fast enough because we didn't start soon enough, but we are where we are, I'm certainly not going to stand in the way of something that I think is not inconsistent with where we're going.
Good. Any other comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the second reading, close the public hearing, which I believe we did, and adopt the two ordinances, number PA 1358 and PA 19-05, as written.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Burney and second by Commissioner Bozievich. Do you have something we need to do?
Real quick, I think if I heard correctly, you mentioned ordinance 1358, but I think
Excuse me, it is ordinance 1359, so if I did, thank you for the clarification.
Didn't hear that either.
Okay. Number,
Madam Chair,
yes. Commissioner
I just
Sorensen.
wanted to ask staff if the inclusion of the previous record was done properly.
Does that need to be part of the motion to include the record from the public hearing of
We can
November?
certainly do that.
Yeah, I think actually that would be a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, friendly amendment? Oh,
You
no.
made the motion, so feel free to clarify.
I did, didn't I? Help me with the wording here. I want to include the minutes of the previous.
Of the joint public hearing from November 4th, 2019.
I would like to include the minutes of the joint public hearing of November 4th to be included in this motion.
Second agrees.
Very good. Any other discussion?
A clarification, Chair Buck.
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
We are voting on ordinance PA 1359 with the inclusion of the minutes
Correct.
from the Springfield meeting.
And ordinance number 19-05.
19-05.
The two ordinances
Perfect.
are tied together, so we're doing one motion and one vote.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Murkowski.
Just a reminder that it's an ordinance, so we take a roll call.
Okay, very good.
Ready?
Feel free.
Commissioner Bozievich?
Aye.
Commissioner Burney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Farr?
Aye.
And Commissioner Buck.
Aye. All right. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for your involvement on this. I know that it's been a long process, but here we are, so thank you.
Yes, very good.
Oh, don't leave yet.
I'll be back.
I'm sure there'll be other topics.
Next up is County Council.
Thank you.
Doesn't have to go very far. Good morning, Chair Buck, members of the board.
Good morning.
Thanks, Sarah. Sasha's going to fire this up.
Are we going to do any announcements or go straight into the report?
I don't have any announcements.
Okay, then we'll move to the Fatal Crash Investigation Team report.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, we appreciate having this opportunity to report to you on transportation safety. The Fatal Crash Investigation Team works under my direction because of the potential legal liability for the county in terms of collisions on our roads. With me is Sasha Vartarian, Transportation Planning Supervisor in Public Works. She's facilitating the team until Becky Taylor returns after her accident. We started updating you last year with quarterly reports on the work of the team. This is our first report for 2020. So I thought it'd be a good idea to, for a little refresher and remind the board what the purpose of FCIT is. We meet once a month, review police reports and roadway photos of actual fatal collisions in on Lane County roads. We have representatives from County Council, Risk Management, the Sheriff's Office, Public Health, and Public Works, Engineering, Maintenance, and Transportation Planning. And the purpose of meeting and reviewing these accidents is how could we prevent this type of crash in the future, and what engineering, education, education and enforcement actions could reduce the risk of that crash. The board made a commitment in 2017 to work towards zero deaths by becoming a member of the National Strategy on Highway Safety. The strategy leverages the 3 E's approach to integrate engineering, enforcement, and education into one framework to maximize resources and results. The engineering aspect aims to incorporate safety as a priority of the transportation infrastructure, with features that minimize the frequency and severity of crashes. The risk approach to engineering safety recognizes that people make mistakes and shouldn't have to die from those mistakes. Drivers also take more risks, such as speeding, because they perceive a low risk of consequences because of the lack of enforcement. Lane County does not have a traffic team. That was cut many years ago. So more and more of our residents, and I know you hear this on a regular basis in public comment, are asking for traffic enforcement and complaining about speeding. The sheriff has indicated he would need about 30 new officers in order to cover the basic services before he could reconstitute the traffic team. And the final leg of the stool is education. There needs to be broader awareness and responsibility around transportation safety, and the FCIT is involved in educating initiatives, including
engineering. So we know that our engineering efforts are working. For example, where we have installed rumble strips on roads, primarily in 2017 and 2018, and continuing work, there have been no fatal crashes on those segments. We installed an estimated 900 curve warning signs last year. These signs have been proven to reduce fatal and severe injury collisions by 20 to 35%. So we continue to identify funding opportunities to support these engineering solutions, and we evaluate safety improvements that can be made as we scope projects for completion.
So 12 people died on Lane County roads in 2019. There has been 1 fatal crash in 2020 in which 2 people died. We start every meeting with a report of any new fatal collisions since the last meeting. Our focus is to address the fatal collisions, but we are also concerned with severe injury collisions, and we're starting to explore how best to evaluate these and determine what data is available. It seems like a bit of common sense, but the difference between a fatal and a severe injury collision is not very much. We can't share any specifics of collision cases under review at this time, but we wanted you to at least let you know that we are investigating these to see what we can do to avoid these types of collisions in the future. And here's a summary of the most combined severe injury and fatal crashes in the last 5 years broken down by road.
So we recognize that the only way to be truly effective in working towards zero deaths on our roads is to come together as a community. With that in mind, we wanted to take some time to highlight our community partners that are working on efforts to support education and enforcement around transportation safety.
One of those is we very early on identified the lack of driver education, especially in rural Lane County. I'm among those old enough to remember when every high school had a driver's education class that you actually took as part of the curriculum. So what we did is we identified this as an issue. So what we did is we went out and convened stakeholders to explore the possibilities and develop a feasible scenario to try and provide this service. With a grant from ODOT, Lane County Lane Educational Service District was able to hire a coordinator to develop a new program to increase driver education access in rural high schools. And as coordinator of the Lane County Drivers Education Initiative, Teens Driving Safely, Sherry Bandy is working towards the goal of having all Lane County 15-year-olds take an ODOT-approved driver education course. To meet this goal, Teens Driving Safely has increased the number of driver education instructors in the county, created and maintained a scholarship fund for teenagers, and collaborated with rural school districts and private driving schools to bring driver education courses to areas outside the metropolitan area. And again, the big push there was to find instructors. That was believe it or not, that was the shortage, was a shortage of instructors. And you may have heard some public service announcements encouraging people to train to become instructors. That's where that came from, is this program.
So the next person we wanted to highlight is Cassidy Mills. She's the new Safe Routes to School coordinator for the new Rural Lane County Safe Routes to School program. This program is funded through a grant from ODOT and is built on a partnership between Lane County, Lane Council of Governments, and Lane Education Service District. In its early stages, Cassidy is helping launch a regional program that addresses the unique active transportation needs of rural students through community-responsive education programs and engagement strategies, and the focus is elementary to middle school students.
Drew is the safety coordinator for Safe Lane Transportation Coalition. He works with local agencies to implement traffic safety education programs throughout Lane County.
And I will just add that a lot of the ideas discussed at the FSIT often end up going to Drew for research and implementation. So they're a very important partner.
And here's another very important community partner. Not sure that many people understand the role that the Waymaster plays. They think perhaps that it's just weighing things, but Michael is the Lane County Public Works Waymaster. His duties that contribute to making Lane County roads safer include making the roads in Lane County safe by enforcing laws, ordinances, and safety regulations pertaining to weights and measures along with safety requirements, providing public assistance as needed for road and traffic crash hazards, and processing abandoned vehicles on Lane County roadways. And the first one I think is one that's often not understood. He does identify and has the ability to take trucks off the road because they're not meeting the safety requirements for things like brakes or they're overloaded or whatever. So it is I know it's very important to the sheriff to get this position funded and to keep it because it does have a huge impact on safety. All right, our next update will be in July. Between now and then, we can provide you with updates on safety reports, especially construction projects in your districts. And at this point, I'd ask if there are any questions from the board.
Comments, questions? Anybody on the phone? Commissioner Sorensen or Commissioner Farr?
I have none. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I guess yes. Yes. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Dingle and Ms. Tartanian for their work on this and all of the other people involved. I know there's many others, both inside the county and outside. Secondly, thanks for updating us on the, activities and work you're doing and how you're doing it. And third, I'd like one or both of you to expand on the issue of the need for driver's education instructors and whether that's still a need and how members of the public who think they could become a driver education instructor, how do they go about doing that?
Yes, it still very much is a need. You can feel free to either contact Sherry herself, or you can email me, and I will make sure to connect anyone who's interested to the right resources to become a driver education teacher.
And I'd like to welcome.
And you have.
Go ahead, Commissioner Sorensen.
Do you have any indication of the number of jobs that they're trying to fill?
I don't on hand, but I can get that and follow up.
Okay, thank you so much.
So I'd like to welcome and invite Sheriff Harold up to the table and then, or up to the podium. If you may say a few words, and then Commissioner Farr, I'll get you next in queue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. Just a couple of things real quick. I'll dovetail into the conversation about driver's ed. I have a 16-year-old who's now a driver, and we live in unincorporated East Lane County. We ended up taking our son to Willamette High School for driver's training, which wasn't exactly a fun evening twice a week, but certainly worthwhile, and glad we were able to. I wanted to provide just a quick remark. When the FSIT first started gathering, I was the chief deputy and Sheriff Trapp was here. We have been plugged into FSIT for a period of time, and we've always had this conversation about engineering, education, and enforcement, and understanding that our presence on the roads is lacking, and therefore our enforcement of traffic law is lacking, not only because we eliminated our traffic safety team, but also the presence of Oregon State Police troopers in our county is really low right now, and they're working hard to improve their staffing. But the gist of it is in unincorporated Lane County, there's a very low presence of traffic safety. One of the comments that's, I think, sort of continued through FSIT's first birth is the comment about how many more deputies we would need before we had a traffic safety team. And I just, Mr. Dingle read that just a moment ago, and I just want to provide a clarifying comment. What he read was we needed 30 more officers before we could have a traffic team. And what I think the original purpose of that was is we have had a longstanding target to get to 30 deputies, 30 FTE to provide the rural law enforcement presence across the county. And as of today, we have 25. So we have had a target of getting that number to 30 ever since the Police Executive Research Forum came and did a study of the Sheriff's Office and how we provided services to the community. And I think that that's where that comment was. And so the difference between 30 more and 5 more is pretty big. So I wanted to provide that piece of clarification. And then I guess just now that I have the honor of being in the position of sheriff, I would comment that I could not get behind the idea of getting back a 20-person traffic team before we're able to provide adequate police responses to calls for service. That said, if there were a funding mechanism to have a smaller team that could be targeted to various areas of the county, obviously the data collection is going really well, then, those conversations should still be had. And so I just wanted to give an opportunity to express my thoughts on that. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
I beg your pardon. I had I missed my mute button. We're hearing about education and enforcement, and I know engineering is a particular interest to Commissioner Bozievich. I drive Highway 126 quite a bit, and I know that Commissioner Bozievich has things to say about that. But I'd like to say that I feel a lot safer now on 126 between Eugene and Florence than I did 5 years ago, for instance. So I'll just hang up or put myself on mute again and listen to Commissioner Bozievich, I hope.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. There has been a significant effort there with the help of some money allocated by the legislature through some efforts of Alex and myself and folks out in the city of Veneta and city of Florence and the whole area. We have gotten some safety improvements there. We got an additional $7 million allocated. That's how the new passing lane just west of Walton got built. The rumble strips being installed as part of the resurfacing projects. The additional turn lanes and lighting that happened between Veneta and the city of Eugene, and some of those improvements were all part of that project. Yet still to come is some guardrail work up on Badger Mountain, which once there was some tree harvesting, some people got a lot more nervous about the curve there. What's interesting is the number of crashes in that curve dropped after the tree harvest because people became more aware that there was actually a drop-off there, so and slowed down. So it's kind of interesting how driver behavior works and all that. No different than knowing that there's enforcement out there tends to change driver behavior, and I appreciate the sheriff's comments on that. I want to make sure people understand that 25 deputies is not 25 deputies on patrol at that time. It takes 5 deputies to cover a 24/7 position. So that means there's maybe 5 deputies out, and that's in the entire, patrol services, which includes sergeants, et cetera. So we're down to normally about 3 and a sergeant covering the entire county at any one time, which is not coverage. And adding another 5 still isn't coverage. So we really need the operational funds. And I would just remind folks that our federal government is not holding up their end when it comes to the ONC timberlands. I showed people the graphs over and over again about how much revenue we used to get from the ONC timberlands and what we're getting now. And it's, we're leaving this on the table right now because we're not advocating to have them hold up their share and get back to some reasonable level of either replacement funding or harvest. Because with that, it comes into our general fund where we fund most of public safety, where we could hire those deputies. and do other work with it, including staffing some of our permanent supportive housing and other operational recurring costs. Very important that we continue to work on that O&C funding when it comes to our safety of our roads.
Any other comments, Commissioner Bernie?
Thank you. It's amazing to me with scarce resources what you are able to accomplish, or what we all and your partners are able to accomplish in this regard. I've been a non-certified driver's training instructor for 3 individuals. All you needed was a car, a kid, and a big parking lot. But yes, it was it was a little different when I was in high school and driver's ed was simply part of the curriculum. You actually got credit for it. But my hat's off to y'all, and I appreciate the report also.
Same here. Thank you very much. I know we need funding for our sheriffs, and we'll continue to work on that. And hopefully we'll keep those fatalities down for the year. Okay, we'll move on to county administration. Mr. Mokryski, you did most of your announcements.
I don't have any. I think I took enough of your time today, so unless you have questions for me.
Very good. It looks like we need to call down Jeff Kincaid, our management analyst, for the next item, which is Order 20-03-10-07 in the matter of approving a contract for architectural and engineering services for facility renovation of the future Lane County Parole and Probation Main Office, and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the contract. And here comes Mr. Kincaid.
Timing.
Perfect timing.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Buck, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Kincaid, Management Analyst in County Administration. This item before you is to approve a contract with GMA Architects for architectural and engineering services for the renovation of the future home of Parole and Probation. So the last time the board heard from us about this project was on November 12th of 2019, and that was when you approved the purchase of the 5 contiguous tax lots at the northeast corner of Roosevelt and Highway 99. Since then, on January 7th, 2020, we've closed on the property, so now we own the property. And we've also, in late 2019, we issued an RFP for these services. We received 2 responses. A team of Parole and Probation and County Administration staff met to review those proposals and make a selection. Ultimately, GMA was selected. So we've been going through the contract process with them, and it's ready for you to consider for approval. Just as a follow-up, pending the action today, the next steps would be to go through the design process with GMA in an effort to request construction bids in the fall. We thought for timing-wise, we thought, we'd like to be in there as soon as possible, but it's not really advantageous for us to bid this in the summer when everyone's really busy from a cost perspective. So we're going to bid them in late fall, start construction in January of 2021, and hopefully occupy. It's between June and August right now is when they'd occupy the site. So that is it for my part of the presentation, and I would hand it over to you, Chair Buck, for any comments or questions.
Great. I'll start with those on the phone. Commissioner Sorensen or Commissioner Farr, if you have any comments.
Negative, Chair Buck.
Okay.
This is Pete Sorensen. I'll just say that the briefings the board's had in executive session are sufficient for me to continue moving forward.
Any comments here? Commissioner Bozovich?
So I'll move approval of Order 20-03-10-07 in the matter of approving a contract for architectural and engineering services for facility renovation of the future Lane County Parole and Probation Main Office and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the contract.
May I second that, please?
It was seconded by me and God.
Motion made by Commissioner Bozovich, second by Commissioner Farr. Discussion, Commissioner Bernie.
Obviously, I support this, but I also think this may be the first opportunity to actually have in place whatever is appropriate in terms of the elements of a community benefits agreement. So since that's the case, and since this county has, we have access to people that have done that before, as appropriate, as you see appropriate, Mike, I just encourage you to enter into that, develop that before procurement documents are put together, or bid documents, because that's going to be incorporated. And since we haven't done that before as a county, I just wanted to call that out. But I certainly approve this process, and I look forward to what that will look like as we move forward. Thank you.
Chair Buck, Vice
Chair Buck, may I speak to the motion, please?
Oh, yes, let's have Mr. Kincaid respond, and then Commissioner Farr, you'll be in queue.
Thank you.
Chair Buck, Vice Chair Burney, I just want to let you know that that's been part of the discussions that we've had ongoing on the things that we're keeping in mind, and we're planning on an update to the board as the project progresses, so we'll make sure we cover that topic as well.
Then forgive me for even reminding.
No, I
no
appreciate
reminder
you bringing it up.
necessary.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I just wanted to take an opportunity to point out the improvements that are happening in Bethel, and particularly in the Four Corners area at this point in time, by Lane County. We're taking a lot of pride in upgrading county land and making Bethel a better place to live, a better place to work, and just a better place to enter the city of Eugene. So thank you, Mr. Mokur-Heisey, and all of your staff for the work that's going into really not only making Lane County a better place, but I believe making Bethel a better place too.
Very good. Any other discussion? All right, we'll call a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have a decision to make on the executive session. We can do it this morning. It will probably take 40 to 50 minutes, and we can get it out of the way early, and then we can still get Commissioner Bozovich off for his next meeting on time.
Thank you.
And otherwise, we'd wait and probably have a longer afternoon. So I would pitch that we should take care of that this morning. Any objection to that?
I like the pitch.
I have done.
All right, then we will go into executive session. Let me read us off, and then we'll take a 5-minute break to get everybody up there and phones up to the conference room. So let me start here. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660 subsection 2, subsection D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise, and it will arise. We will be coming back to Harris Hall at 1:30 for our regular session. We are now in recess.